Let's look at school reopening. School reopening was, as far as I'm concerned, was a disaster. Other communities were opening back in the fall, or at least preparing to open back in the fall, and it didn't happen. The first excuse was because the ventilation system had not been tested and checked and upgraded. Well, they had all summer to do that. As mayor, I certainly, once the schools were closed, I would have been on top of getting a reopening plan in place because we knew we were going to reopen and we had to make sure that it was going to be a safe reopening. So having a schedule on when those upgrades and testing would be done would be paramount. So I would have been on top of that. And two, even after that, we were still hamstrung in terms of our reopening because we didn't have the asymptomatic testing in place to make our teachers feel safe. And that's something that the teachers, they say they wanted to come back to our schools. They were just concerned for their health and safety. And that is something that, communities around us were able to implement. Wellesley did it. The group that I work with, even though I don't have children in their schools, we're the Safer Teachers, Safer Schools Coalition that work with communities throughout the state. Revere, Chelsea, Wellesley, Lexington. We were all working towards the common goal of getting our kids and teachers safely back into schools. And unfortunately, our school administration, as well as our mayor, we approached, just totally blocked it. They had it under their control. It took months and months later than our peer communities to get our schools open. When we talk about, teaching about racism, that's why I'm very much of a supporter for having ethnic studies in our schools. As we talked about earlier, it's very important that our stories be told, whether as Asian Americans, as Black residents, as Latinos. We all have to get our stories told. People have to hear our histories. They are all unique, and is very critical for people to understand who we are and understand our differences. That's the only way we can combat racism, as far as I'm concerned.
As well as the slow opening of Newton Public Schools, because as far as I understand, none of her kids ever went to public schools here in Newton. And she just doesn't, I mean, if she doesn't think the Newton schools are good enough for her own children, then, the commitment just isn't there.
As someone who had all three of her kids go to Newton Public Schools, I really do feel that commitment. As I mentioned earlier, I would be somebody on the school committee, not just, one vote, but I would be an advocate for our kids and for our parents, having gone through that experience and knowing what is needed. Obviously, I don't know what the current status is as my kids have, grown out of it, but I certainly would remain engaged and active and help lead the discussions that, clearly are not happening.
I would just like to share a quick story. About 7 years ago, I found out that Newton North was doing a musical called Thoroughly Modern Millie. And I thought it was, racist against Asians. And I blogged a lot about it. And it was like a month of turmoil for me and, working with Jennifer Price, then principal of Newton North. And I landed on the front page of the Boston Globe. That's how big it became. And in the midst of this, Amy Sangiolo reached out to me to say, "Hey, what's going on? How can I help?" When Newton North insisted on holding a community a community event to talk about it, Amy was there, and she was a calm voice in the middle of this like acrimonious points of view. And then Amy on her own met with the superintendent and then talked to me, like contacted me. Like I didn't even go to Amy Sangiolo, but she just stepped in and just quietly, without a lot of fanfare, she tried to help. She tried to make it better. Um, I had a similar encounter with Ruth Ann Fuller. I was at the Say Her Name March like this past year in Newton. I saw Ruth Ann and I said, "Hey, I'm very upset and concerned that the Newton Police Department is mostly white. Like, look around. There's 25 police officers. They're all white and male." And so we had a conversation and it went kind of like this. well, my hands are tied because we have to hire from Newton for the police department. And I said, oh, well, what's the ethnicity of Newton? BIPOC. Oh, it's 25%. I was like, well, I don't think the police is matching that. No, but it's just so hard to hire, diverse candidates. And I said, well, I am in staffing. I deal with this all the time. I have ideas of how to hire diverse candidates. And so Ruth Ann said, oh, well, I would be interested. Why don't you email me and write up your ideas and I will meet with you? So I did. I wrote it up. I posted it on my blog. I tagged her in social media. I emailed her. I never got a return email. She never emailed me back. Maybe my email didn't get there. That's why I put it on social media. That's why I tagged her personally on her personal Twitter, not just the mayor Twitter. Um, and, do I feel like things are improving with the Newton police? Like, I know there's things that are happening, perhaps, but, the new police chief is not BIPOC. I don't, you know, there was a man on the autism spectrum who was murdered, and that's on Ruth Ann Fuller's watch. Like that, I haven't heard. Yeah. So those are two different experiences, and I just feel like, you know, like we deserve a mayor who listens and someone who is quietly effective, who is trying to make change. Um, I think having a woman of color, um, it brings a different perspective, a more sensitive approach, a more problem-solving approach. And I mean, that's why I support it. I'm not even someone who is that political, to be honest. But if we want Amy to become mayor, then, she needs help. And that help is not just, showing up to listen to her, which is great, but it takes dollars to run a mayor campaign. And we need to show that she's a serious, viable candidate by helping her fundraise. And we're hoping to help her raise $20,000 by the end of July. And if you want to help her with this, quest and give her a fighting chance, please donate. You can go to amysangiolo.org. There's a tab there for donating. So please donate if you can, and please tell other people to donate or at least to listen to her.